How did you sleep last night? Over a third of adults get fewer than 7 hours sleep, and of those who claim to get more, the quality of their sleep is often questionable due to bad habits or misunderstood sleep aids. Sleep is the Swiss Army knife of human health. When sleep is deficient, there is sickness and disease, and when sleep is abundant, there is vitality and health. Dr. Matthew Walker. For those of you that are new, I'm Tom, and I describe myself as a longevity enthusiast. I want to live without restriction, without limits, for as long as I possibly can, in the best possible shape that I can. I can't buy my way there just yet, so what I'm doing is improving little by little and taking you along the journey. I used to optimize everything. With every small change that I used to make in my life, I used to make sure that I was doing it to the absolute max. But I often did this at the expense of the life I wanted to live, and ended up making sacrifices that, in retrospect, I wasn't happy with. Now, there are going to be sacrifices with every sort of little improvement that you make in your life, and now I've come to the realization that I need to make sure I'm happy with those sacrifices, and that's why I'm making this channel, to make sure that you have all the information and so many different ways to improve your life, such as improve your sleep, improve your VO2 max, that you can choose little ways to improve it and not have to sacrifice any of the life that you want to live. So this first part is going to be focused on the environment that we want to create to help hone that perfect night's sleep. Now, the theme of this video is going to be changes that we can make overnight, and they're going to be very easy to implement. But some of the benefits might take a while to be realized and for you to feel the full effect. So all I ask is that you stay consistent with this if you are putting it in, because I promise you, you will feel those effects over time. Now, when we talk about environment, this isn't necessarily restricted to the bedroom. What we need prior to sleep is some sort of warm down routine. And I want to kind of relate it to driving. If you're coming home after work, you wouldn't pull straight into your drive or your garage at 40 miles an hour. At least I really hope not. And it's the same for going to sleep. What we want to do is just slow everything down a little bit before we get into bed and make sure that we are prepped both mentally and physically for that night's sleep. Now, we're going to go into the habits that we can do within this routine at this point here. But for now, what we're going to do is focus on the environmental changes that we can make to foster that perfect night's sleep and put us in that right frame of mind. The first of which is going to be light, or more specifically, dark. As we learned in the last video, our circadian rhythm is very sensitive to light. And what this means is that when we're trying to drift off, the presence of light, or specifically blue light, can interfere with our circadian rhythm and really mess up our internal timings. So the recommendation from me here is to, if you've got dimmers, just dim them 50%, or maybe if you don't have dimmers, but you've got maybe a lamp in the room, just put the lamp on relative to the overhead lights, as that's going to bring the total light in the room down. This phase into darkness will signal to the body to release melatonin, which is again what we discussed in the last video, and it will really make sure the body's getting prepped in time to go to bed. Now, our circadian visual system actually works against us here quite annoyingly, in that when we're trying to go to sleep, it's a lot more sensitive later on in the day to light, and so the smallest bit of light can really influence our wakefulness. So it's really important to kind of get that gradual shift down. Likewise in the morning, because it's very important when you wake up to get that spike in cortisol, to get light into the eyes very early on, but our circadian visual system isn't as sensitive, and so it's going to need so much more light. The recommendation here is like a Lux lamp, and one thing that I use to get both of these really kind of nailed is I've just got a Lumi lamp. And what this does is, 45 minutes prior to bedtime, I can set a sunset setting. And over that 45 minutes, the light will slowly decrease in my room and, trigger the release of melatonin, get me ready to sleep. And then in the morning, it does the reverse. So it's kind of like a sunrise, half an hour prior to my alarm, that light's going to slowly start increasing so that I can, number one, wake up a lot more naturally. But number two, I have that bright light in my eyes very early on, gets me going. Temperature is an interesting one, as we know that we have to keep it cool, but it's often quite difficult to, number one, measure, and number two, control. The adage that Dr. Matthew Walker uses is warm up to cool down to fall asleep, stay cool to stay asleep, warm up to wake up. And this is in reference to the thermal trigger zones. These thermal trigger zones relate specifically to the sleep onset trigger zone, the deep sleep trigger zone, and then the wake trigger zone. And what this is going to mean is that for that sleep onset trigger zone, what we want to do is drop our core body temperature. So just remember, the adage is warm up to cool down to fall asleep. And what this means is when we lie down, naturally our body flushes heat towards the surface of our body. And so our hands, our feet, anything that's quite vascular will warm up as we dump a lot of this heat into them. So our core body temperature cools down. And so that will trigger the onset of sleep as we are cooling down the internal parts of our body. Now, onto the habits. The most important thing for high quality sleep is consistency and regularity, because we want to make sure that that circadian rhythm is on a sort of timer and it kind of knows when to expect sleep, so we can fall asleep faster and wake up better. Now, a key part of the sort of wind down routine that I mentioned earlier is winding down mentally as well as physically, because often when our head hits the pillow, that's the first time in our day that we can reflect on what's happened throughout the day. And what this can lead to is, because we're not really interrupted during this time, we can think excessively and then ruminate and then exacerbate. And small actions that happen throughout the day suddenly seem a lot worse. And this causes sort of an onset of anxiety, which makes it a lot more difficult to fall asleep. Now, one thing that I recommend is to just sort of go on a sort of short meditation or a mental walk. And I'll talk about that in a second. So this short meditation, I recommend guided, because as someone who's tried meditation in a lot of different forms throughout the years, it is quite paradoxically difficult to quiet the mind by focusing on thinking of nothing. But these guided meditations are really, really good. You can just put one on Spotify so you're not really looking at your phone. And what this does is it just causes you to focus on your breathing, on any other aspects that kind of takes your mind off the day prior to going to bed. And this will, make sure that you're not going to bed feeling anxious and that you're going to bed with a clear mind. Now, the alternative is what Dr. Matthew Walker calls a mental walk. If you're not really into meditation, you don't really want to do that, the recommendation is with this mental walk to just close your eyes and imagine a route that you know very, very well. And then in your head, go on this walk and try and remember as much detail as possible. That car's usually parked there. What make is that car? What's the number plate? That's a little bit too much detail. But what make is that car? What colour's that car? What shops am I going past? Is there a dog that usually comes past me? And the amount of time that you spend remembering that, you're taking your brain off what's happened throughout the day and you're really just sort of clearing your mind. The goal with either of these methods, be that meditation, be that mental walk, is just to get our mind off the day and just make sure these stresses aren't impacting the onset of sleep that we have. What time do you fall asleep? Reason why I mention this is because I used to have my watch on my bedside table, and I used to just always monitor the time, whether I was stretching, whether I was journaling, reading. This is the time, so at 9 p.m. in my head. If I fall asleep by this time, then I get my 8 hours, I wake up with all this energy and I can attack the day. But actually what this led to was pressure building up. If I don't feel sleepy by this time, what's going to happen? I have to fall asleep at 9 p.m. And this just created anxiety, which actually made it more difficult to fall asleep. And then, when you're past 9 p.m., I'm thinking, how much sleep am I actually losing? I have to fall asleep as quickly as possible, which again just made it worse and worse. Since removing that watch, I fall asleep so much better. I focus on when I feel most sleepy as opposed to when theoretically I should fall asleep. So if you've got watches, clocks in your bedroom, just take them out. It will reduce your stress a lot and improve the onset of your sleep. Now, the phone is something that I am still working on. Before I got my alarm clock, what I used to do was get out of bed, turn my alarm off, so you should charge it away from my bed, and then get straight back into bed, read the messages, the notifications, which, after listening to Dr. Matthew Walker, I realized it now created anticipatory anxiety. And so my brain subconsciously the night before was just thinking, when I wake up, you're going to feel so much anxiety towards the messages you're going to get. What are we going to be doing? Is this going to change what the plan was for the day after? And this caused me to sleep a lot shallower, and my deep sleep was really affected. So I was woken up a lot more often by kind of small things that normally wouldn't trigger, someone to wake up. With regards to food and eating windows, the research has shown that up to an hour before bed, if you're eating, there's no real disruption to your sleep cycle or sleep onset, quality of your sleep. When we get to around the 45-minute mark, that is where we see some disruption, but again, this can depend on your chronotype and when you feel most hungry. A common misconception is that carbohydrates will cause you to feel sleepy, and I think there is more evidence, more studies to be released on this, but as it stands, that dip in energy that we feel after lunch is called postprandial somnolence, and the misconception has just been that this is caused by carbohydrates, by eating at that time, but in reality, this isn't strictly true because that just falls in line with the natural circadian rhythm and sleep-wake cycle, so we naturally feel a little bit sleepier. Where there is some truth to it is when you're eating high-calorie meals, very big meals, these cause fluctuations in proteins called cytokines, and then this can lead to short-term dips in fatigue. On to the big three, and we're going to start with caffeine. The effect of caffeine on sleep is widely known. It has a half-life of around 5 hours, 5.5 hours, and this means that after 5 hours from ingesting it, you have 50% of it still in your bloodstream. The recommendation here is to limit your caffeine intake into the morning, just to make sure that it's not interrupting your sleep that much. Limit it to around 2 or 3 cups a day, and then cut it off maybe 10 hours before going to sleep. 12 p.m. is what I kind of use, and then 12 p.m. is kind of like the normal, no caffeine after 12. The reason why I don't want to say cut it out completely is because that surge in energy you feel after that second cup of coffee will bring so many benefits for your motivation, for your overall momentum throughout the day. It's not really worth taking it out completely. Obviously, in an optimal life you would, but what we want to do is just create those sorts of boundaries and just make sure that we're getting the best of both. Alcohol is quite misunderstood when it comes to being used as a sleep aid. When you've had a few drinks, you've found that, maybe it's quite easy to fall asleep, and you might mistake this for proper, healthy sleep. When in actual fact, alcohol is a sedative, and we often misconstrue this sedation for sleep. As a matter of fact, alcohol blocks a lot of REM sleep from happening, and REM sleep is really critical for processing what's gone on throughout the day. We see a similar effect when it comes to cannabis as well. Over half of people that use cannabis use it to fall asleep faster, and I think to understand this, what we have to do is separate cannabis into THC and CBD. With regards to THC, yes, using it will help with the onset of sleep, but similar to alcohol, it does block REM sleep, and prolonged use will build up to a REM sleep debt, and you keep foregoing this REM sleep so that when you eventually get off it or stop using it, you will have such vivid dreams and could also suffer insomnia withdrawal as well. Additionally, the longer you use, the more of a tolerance you build up, and with this tolerance comes the requirement for more and more to be used to get that same level of sleep you had before, which is not ideal. CBD, on the other hand, is a lot more interesting to look at. We're going to look at this theoretically because the volume of research just isn't there yet. CBD has been shown to be a hypothermic, so it drops core body temperature, which should help with that thermal trigger zone and onset of sleep. It's also been shown to reduce anxiety, which will clear the mind, get you less stressed, and again should help with the onset of sleep. So on these 2 points alone, it does look like it's a good sleep aid. However, the function of CBD is a U-curve. And so what this means is that in this happy medium, we have the benefits resulting in an onset of sleep. But too much or too little could result in the onset of wakefulness, which is not what we want. When it comes to regulation, in the US specifically, it's not really regulated too strictly. It is improving, but what this means is that when you've got a specific quantity you're trying to hit, you're sort of rolling the dice and you could end up at the peak of the U-curve in regards to the place where you want to be at the bottom. Now, Dr. Matthew Walker is working on this with a team in King's College of London to get some more concrete data on how this works. So there we are. I have tried to stick to the theme of changes you can make overnight and make them as simple as possible. I'm just going to flash them up at the end of this video just so you've got the main recommendations. And I might do a lot more videos on sleep. I'm very interested by this, and there are so many questions left unanswered. I was actually looking at doing a sleep study before recording this video, and might do a video on that as well, like my experience, my results, because it's a lot more readily accessible than I was expecting, so it's a lot more feasible for me to do. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.